Good evening. Indeed, it's not an easy task to be the last speaker, to be honest.
We've been looking forward to you.
Yes, and this panel, of course, is supposed to be a bit more forward-looking than much of the conference, which has been very, very analytical. And I would like to start being forward-looking by suggesting further conference opportunities. Why? Because this conference was aligned on the 10th anniversary of Lehman Brothers, practically the start of the great financial crisis, which caused a lot of misery for many countries, but that unfortunately includes a lot of Europeans as well. What I think is that this crisis lasted so long and it was so complex that there are many further conference opportunities down the line. And I would like to give you some suggestions. And afterwards, when we list some of these key episodes of the financial and economic crisis, I would indeed elaborate on what I call the slow motion EMU reform and the risks of that. If I have to suggest a kind of short list, let's say 10 key moments of this 10 years of the financial crisis, I would like to give you this table. Hopefully it's visible also from the back. You have seen probably so many charts and graphs and figures in these days that apart from this table, which is also a bit of a chronology of the European crisis, I will only show pictures, and that will simplify our life and the discussion. So we, of course, start from Lehman Brothers, which is an event taking place on the September 15th, 2008 in the United States, which many of us at that time created the feeling that this might be another crisis of the Anglo-American model of the financial sector and the economy. And already before, for about 1 year before Lehman Brothers, a lot of people thought that the problem fundamentally belongs to this over-financialized Anglo-American model. This is probably still an interesting research topic, whether there is still a fundamental difference or a significant difference between various models of capitalism, especially if you apply this transatlantic comparison and also put the United Kingdom into the Anglo-American basket rather than the continental European. But what was understood already at that time, probably very clearly, that the scale of this fall, this financial meltdown, is not ordinary, and it can only be compared to the great financial crisis of 1929 and the years that followed. Now, people, of course, started to prepare for tackling a financial crisis, but hoping that at least this time it's not going to end up in fascism, which was in the case in the 1930s. Look, just like the former Chinese premier Chu Enlai said, it's probably too early to say whether this is the eventual political outcome. There's a lot more talk about populism, like in the previous presentation, but much of what we call populism actually covers a more serious degeneration of politics and the undermining of the rule of law and democratic structures. There's no better example, unfortunately, than my own country, at least what concerns the European context. And that also gives us the next idea of a 10 years anniversary, the Hungarian loan. November 6, 2008, a surprisingly big package, $20 billion from the International Monetary Fund and the European Union, which should bring back the feeling that at least at the beginning, after Lehman Brothers, the feeling was that the non-Eurozone countries will be more vulnerable than the Eurozone. The Eurozone practically protects and shields you from all these difficulties of the world economy. Now, this is actually a picture that comes from a so-called national summit. The prime minister of the time still tried to call a so-called national summit, bringing in the opposition as well. That's actually the head of the central bank, the academia. It actually took place at the Academy of Sciences. But of course, the opposition was opportunistic enough and blamed all the hardships that followed also from the IMF conditionality on the incumbent government. And then Mr. Orbán ended up with the two-thirds so-called constitutional majority and created this massive problem for the country, but also for the rest of Europe. So the political degeneration coming out from the financial crisis already started at that time. But most of those focusing on the Eurozone, of course, look at another date as a starting point of great calamities, and that's the 9th of May 2010, the date of the first Greek bailout. Why was it 9th of May? One might believe that it coincides with Europe Day, and people wanted to mark the Europe Day with this act of solidarity, that the country which is cut off from the financial markets now receives support, official loans from the community as a whole, together with the International Monetary Fund. Now, most of those who are German here probably remember the real cause of this date, the North Rhine-Westphalia elections. That before the German elections in a very important state, it was politically not possible to make this necessary step, which everybody knew was inevitable at the end of the day. But we learned, not the first time and not the last time in 2010, that critical steps are only made after a German election is taking place. That always creates expectations before a general or a major state election in Germany. Now, this was also a moment when the so-called Troika was created, and obviously any anniversaries or conferences about this day can and should discuss how the Troika functioned and what was the effect of its performance. Why was the Eurogroup not visible? Only the Troika, while the real decisions, the real deals were made inside the Eurogroup. This is pretty much the issue of the past. The Troika officially has never been disbanded, but it will never come back in a future crisis. Why? Because the IMF has been there, and we can be absolutely certain that in the United States, under the current administration, or the UK, which is actually Brexiting, the International Monetary Fund will not be authorized anymore to participate in such kind of rescue exercise inside the Eurozone. Now, that brings me to the next anniversary. It will come also in the autumn, 2 years from now, Deauville, which is a very famous walk by the German Chancellor and the French President. At that time, we called them the Merkozy, because they were seen so often together, and they displayed this kind of very romantic model of economic policy making in the European Union with limited transparency, but a capacity to surprise. And the big surprise of Deauville, if you remember, was that very shortly, I mean just a few months after this Greek bailout, which essentially saved the private investors from losses, they announced that, well, now and in the future, also private investors will have to absorb some losses, and they will not always be paid out by the taxpayer, because we have to protect the innocent taxpayer of our countries. Now, what is the quick lesson from that? But you are welcome to investigate in the next 2 years. That number one, you can also say the right thing in the wrong moment with the wrong effect, because probably the content of this is right, but saying that at the time created hell for Greece, which was trying to work according to the conditionality of the loan. But Greece and other financially vulnerable countries, Ireland at that time, but also Portugal, were just pushed deeper into the difficulties which they were experiencing at that time. And the second lesson is that Franco-German accord and agreement is not sufficient for dealing with the crisis. Of course, we know that this is the essence of European integration, and that's the origin of the European integration, and it's always bad if France and Germany disagree. They should agree if there is one way. But it's insufficient. They can agree also on stupidities, like in the previous case, the punitive conditionality for Greece, under the agreement that their bank should not be harmed, and also choosing the wrong moment for delivering a message which otherwise was not entirely stupid. Now, this, of course, did not put an end to the crisis. Quite the contrary, the feeling that things are inconsistent and out of control were deepening and making a strong impact on the market players. And that brought us to larger countries. After the first round, when relatively smaller countries were affected by the crisis, Greece, Ireland, and Portugal, the escalation resulted in the so-called flamboyant Prime Minister of Italy, Berlusconi, stepping down, and the technocratic government coming in, which, as a first act, had to announce massive savings, about 30 billion euros, plus structural reforms, starting with the pension system. Again, what I would say that Elsa Fornero, who is on that picture, announcing the pension reform, was probably academically right when she delivered the inconvenient truth that somehow there has to be a link between life expectancy and the retirement age, and you cannot have such a high share of pension vis-à-vis GDP as it was the case in Italy, with such high inactive young population, inactive female population as Italy had. But as part of the package, it was not only immediately unpopular, but it was also difficult to pronounce the word sacrifice. Those who forgot, it was the word sacrifice, which she failed to pronounce, and the Prime Minister next to him, Mario Monti, had to help out. So it seems Italian sacrifice is the hardest word, especially in those times. But please don't forget that this situation, that larger countries already became affected by a full-blown Eurozone crisis at the end of 2011, was not purely a consequence of this domino effect by itself. We also have to pay attention to monetary policy. That before the change of the guard, the ECB was not only increasing the interest rate in a pro-cyclical fashion, but also sending secret letters to the government of Spain, the government of Italy, which, when it became public, immediately gave rise to protest movements. So if we want to see the origin of the so-called populist movement, the 5-star in Italy, this is the origin. And then the actions of the European Central Bank, plus the conditionality, which was implemented at the time, played a major role. But, as we know, there was a change of guard at the helm of the European Central Bank, and in July 26, I forgot to mention the previous date, so it was December 6 when Elsa Fornero was mentioning, just for your notes. July 26, 2012, Mario Draghi had to announce that he would do whatever it takes to save the euro. And he has enough ammunition, he added in his own way. Now, why did we arrive to this point? We arrived to this point because, as Paul Krugman, at that time a famous columnist of the New York Times, also Nobel Prize winner, economist, put it, the confidence fairy died in the spring of 2012. What was the confidence fairy? A very good research topic, that if there is a financial crisis, imposing fiscal cuts will impress the financial markets in terms of the capacity of the government to take control and enhance competitiveness, and that will somehow revive the market confidence and help bringing down the CDS spreads. Now, the CDS spreads sometimes responded to these adjustment efforts, but in the spring of 2012, it was over, especially in the case of Spain. And the European Council, which by that time was about bi-monthly, holding a crisis meeting, in June 2012, demonstrated that not even the smallest deviation would be allowed for helping Italy and helping Spain, even if the requests of Mario Monti were very, very modest at that point. So if the European Council practically gives the impression of a suicide sect, the markets obviously go mad. And Draghi had to stand alone and say a few things, which of course he was unprepared to substantiate at that point. But then, indeed, the ECB rolled out some new instrument and emerged as a kind of bastion to save the single currency, turning the tide on the financial markets, bringing back real economic growth, and shortly after helping also unemployment to come down. But this was not, by far, not the end of the story, because if the ECB saves us, if there is a safety net, endless ammunition in Frankfurt am Main to stabilize the single currency, we can experiment. And we can, for example, experiment with smaller countries, which will probably unlikely destroying the rest of the Eurozone, for example, Cyprus. And let's try in Cyprus bringing in the depositors, right? What is the reaction? So we can have a kind of trial and error when a new Eurogroup president comes in and telling the world that from now onwards, in order to save the innocent taxpayers, we will hit depositors, maybe not. Maybe it would be just the investors of this bank. But the Cyprus bail-in, March 25, 2013, again demonstrated that the crisis response enters a new stage, which is a kind of trial and error. As one of the vice presidents of the European Commission at that time said in a meeting, this was the crash course of Jeroen Dijsselbloem as a relatively inexperienced president of the Eurogroup, which is, I think, an important point of information to highlight that the political consequences of this financial crisis did not appear in a way that we go into a crisis and the populists come. First, when we went into a crisis, most of the elections in 2010 and 11 were won by the center-right. And then in 2012 and 13, most of the elections were won by the center-left. In France, you probably still remember François Hollande, but even before him, Denmark, smaller countries, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, new member of the EU, also under Social Democrats, the Socialist Prime Minister in Austria, in Belgium, in smaller countries, Lithuania, Malta, plenty of countries, in Italy, don't forget, and in some other countries, Finland, Ireland, in coalition, Social Democrats, plenty. The chance was given. The chance was given. Also, don't forget Germany coming back in a coalition. The chance was given to social democracy to make an impact on the crisis, but this picture also illustrates this chance, this opportunity was pretty much wasted. Social Democrats, on the other hand, were banging the table for an investment plan to do away with austerity, which was largely done by the center-right, and go for investment. Now, who took the laurels for having an investment plan in Europe? The Spitzenkandidat of the center-right, Jean-Claude Juncker. So not even something which was advocated for years by the center-left was producing any kind of bonus point for social democracy. In a way, the investment plan announced on November 26, 2014, the so-called Juncker plan, was a kind of game changer, at least intellectually, because it clarified that growth will come from investment and not from other things. And it also helped to kind of remodel the European business model in a way by putting the so-called promotional banks, National Development Bank, Investment Bank, into a greater role at a time when the private banking sector was still insufficient to finance real economic growth. Unfortunately, this investment plan was also a cause for evading further EMU reform. What we have as EMU reform, in reality, a part of the banking union, ESM, and a few more things, were all produced under the previous Commission. Very little has been added at this time. A Juncker plan was launched, but it's a one-off thing, and the very late so-called quantitative easing by the ECB also helped to create this recovery. But the recovery, unfortunately, meant for many that this more fundamental reform of the EMU, which was envisaged at least since 2012, was not necessary. The second last important date is July 5, 2015, the Greek referendum, which is really remarkable because after Greece having lost about a quarter of its GDP, Wolfgang Schäuble still tried to get rid of them and get them out of the Eurozone, and he still made a last attempt to break up the Euro area. So it was, I would say, really a kind of extraordinary experience after all these years. And, of course, not less interesting from the other side, whereby the Greek Prime Minister was trying something which was probably academically right, but politically they failed to build up the necessary alliance for changing the course, not least because of being a bit too provocative and also insulting those who should have been invited as allies for cooperation. Nevertheless, the re-election of Tsipras meant that for the electorate it's more important if someone tries. It's more important than succeeding. And the electorate can reward the great efforts for standing up. The last point, I would say, in the story is August 9, 2016, the Spain-Portugal decision, when eventually some countries that have been maintaining so-called excessive deficits would have been given fines under the existing rules, which are on the paper in the treaty, but they were not. And in a way, that was the day when the stability and growth rules died in the European Union, not least because of the Greek experience, not least because of the long anti-austerity protest in various countries of Southern Europe, but apparently all sides agreed by that time that in reality you don't really have to take literally all these rules, and they were seen to be buried until the Italian government came, and now suddenly we are told that the rules are alive again, and Italy will have to act and revise its budget accordingly. Now, I gave 10 suggestions for further conferences, and you showed me a number 5.
10 for 10 suggestions.
Okay. What I wanted to stress again, that this story also since 2016 shows that it's very, very difficult to reform the system when, so to speak, the sun is shining. There was a suggestion already last year, as many times before, that when actually things are more quiet, there should be a more fundamental reform of the economic and monetary union, as opposed to the very incremental one. I could borrow it from Helen, who applied this to the international economy. But we can do the same for the European monetary union, that the reform process, to some extent, it produced various types of action. But it has often been improvised, random, half-baked, not fully consistent, instead of having a systematic overview, some kind of European Bretton Woods, which would facilitate a faster decision making. In my view, the current Commission practically absorbed this approach with an ideology that perhaps you don't need in reality, this far-fetched comprehensive reform, which was outlined in 2012, with a banking union, fiscal union, political union. There is an ideology also in economics literature. I call it the third way, which is represented by authors like Martin Sandbu, Charles Wiplosz, Philippe Legrand, who otherwise write very nice books and critical about the austerity, but they believe that the debate is not bipolar. It's not between those who are the Austerians and the Federalists, but there is a third way. The Austerians should stop pushing austerity on the deficit countries. The deficit countries should stop asking for transfers. You have to square the circle by renationalizing risk, and this way relieve all these competencies and new roles that have been assumed by the European level in this way. How do they explain the crisis, this long crisis, without accepting that this is an incomplete and imperfect monetary union? They say that too many errors have been made, human errors, policy mistakes. People were stupid. They didn't see that debt relief, QE, need to come in time as opposed to too late. This is, in a way, not entirely wrong, because it's true that a lot of mistakes were made, but it assumes that the next crisis can be avoided by people learning very, very quickly and just suddenly becoming much smarter than they were in the previous years. That's where I lose the confidence in this third way, to be honest. I think there are many examples which show that people are not not just not learning, but recycling bad ideas. If there are questions, I will give you a few examples. There is now, in a way, a false sense of stability, which also discourages substantial reform. Plus, we know that in the last year of a parliament or the last year of a commission, very serious new proposals are not anymore put on the table. And this is also a way to delay decisions further. So the EMU is not going to be reformed when the sun is shining or when it is raining. It can only be reformed when the sky is falling, like what happened in 2012. And we once got away with this approach in 2012 to assume that we will succeed again with much, much less political capital than in those years, in my view, is very complacent and irresponsible. Thank you very much for your attention.